Do you want to illuminate your art with artificial light? Or do you just want to learn more about how to draw and color interior lighting? Hi, my name is Oyun Orka, a VTuber who tries to draw, and coloring lighting is one of my favorite steps in the drawing process. So for today, let's talk about ways you can illuminate your art with artificial lighting. Before getting into the drawing demonstration, I'd like to first take some time to talk about color temperature. So what exactly is color temperature? Well, according to the Westinghouse Lighting Company, color temperature is a way to describe the light appearance provided by a light bulb. It is measured in the degrees of Kelvin, K, on a scale from 1000 to 10,000. So generally, light bulb colors can range from warm to cool tones. Here I made a quick diagram of different light bulbs at different color temperatures, ranging from 2000 Kelvin to 9000 Kelvin. You might not see light bulbs at 2000 Kelvin or 9000 Kelvin very often since they're at the very fringes of this diagram, which means they're either very warm or very cool, but the middle range of colors in light bulbs, particularly ranging from around 2700 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin, is what would be most common for average light bulbs. So let's talk about the different colors of light bulbs. Let's start with warm light. So warm light, which is around 2700 Kelvin, is commonly found in residential lighting. It is used primarily in living rooms or bedrooms, in places where people want cozier, warm, and inviting vibes. It's also common in dimmer restaurants that want a more dramatic lighting mood, or in hipster cafes. Next is neutral lighting, which is around 3500 Kelvin. This is common in commercial or industrial places, and also commonly used in bathrooms, entryways, or overhead lights. Neutral light bulbs are also common in supermarkets, where people want to see what a product looks like under neutral lighting. Next is cool light, which is around 5000 Kelvin. This is considered daylight, but it has a cool undertone and is used mostly for task lighting, which are places where you want to get things done. This is common in offices, kitchens, basements, or parking lots. And finally, there's very cold light, which is around 6000 Kelvin or higher. This is identified by the cool tones with blue hues visible in the lighting, and is commonly seen in sterile environments, such as doctors' offices. Due to the often brighter light, this is also suitable for use in aquariums and in horticulture to promote plant growth. It's also the light used by the LED headlights of the car blinding you from your rearview mirror at night. So, why does common light bulb temperatures even matter? Well, it doesn't have to matter for every interior drawing you do, but it's a helpful thing to apply to your art depending on what sort of context or mood you want to go for. For example, warm light gives off a more cozy and intimate feel, and it's nice to use it for more relaxing scenes, such as when a character is reading something under candlelight, or while a character is relaxing in a bedroom. Meanwhile, neutral lighting gives off a neutral feel, so it has the most applications. I personally like using it for mysterious or ambiguous scenes since it doesn't particularly lean one way or the other in terms of mood. Meanwhile, cool light gives off an industrial and sterile feel, so I like to use it for city backgrounds a lot. Bright, cool colored light is also not very commonly seen in the natural world, so I like to use it for more industrial vibes. So, what about the other colors of light outside of just orange, yellow, white, and blue light bulbs? Well, of course you can use any colors to light up your scene, even in interiors. There's a lot of different types of colors for artificial lights outside of the ones typical to light bulbs. Honestly, you can choose whichever light color you want, but if you don't know where to start, keeping in mind the context of the interior drawing, along with light bulbs commonly used in that setting, is a helpful way to get yourself started. So now let's move on to the drawing demonstration. I already have a sketch pre-drawn, so let's start with that. For this drawing, I'm going for a diner booth at night. I'd like the character to be illuminated by some sort of warm light to give off a cozy diner feel, and also have some more maybe cooler tone lights in the background from the city. A feature I like in Clip Studio Paint is to open my references as a new file, then snapping it to the left side of the screen, which opens it in a new tab. Then I can adjust the size it takes on the canvas, and keep my references at easy access on the left side. This way I don't have to flip between different canvases to see my reference and the drawing I'm working on. So now let's start lining. Now that I've finished lining it, it's time for me to collect photo references. Whenever doing art pieces with backgrounds, I like to collect a lot of photo references at the beginning so I know how to plan out my colors and also to use it as inspiration. Here I'm using Unsplash, which is a great resource for people to find free-to-use photos at high quality. Here I find a photo by Hans Vivek that I really like, and I check to see if it's free to use under the Unsplash license. The Unsplash license covers commercial and non-commercial purposes. While no permission is needed, attribution is appreciated for the photographers as it provides exposure to their work and encourages them to continue sharing. So going back to this photo, I'll copy the image and then create new from clipboard. I find that copying and pasting images to a new Clip Studio Paint file is the easiest way for me to have references and actually use them while drawing. Now I'll just copy and use Ctrl-V on my keyboard to paste more photos onto the same canvas. All of the photos that I've used here are linked below in the description. Please go check out all the wonderful photographers providing these high quality images for free in the description down below. Since obviously I can't see all of the photos at once, I'll go to Edit, change canvas size, and make the canvas size a bit larger. This way I can clearly see all the photos at once without having to hide and unhide layers. Now I'll move the photo references onto the left side so I have it easily accessible whenever I'm drawing. I'll minimize the space it takes on the canvas a little bit and continue sketching. So why am I going back to sketching? Well, I looked at the diner photo and realized that without some props, the diner table feels kind of empty. So I'm going to add some menus or maybe even a condiment caddy to the left side of the table to add a little bit more visual interest to the drawing. Here I'll also quickly add a perspective grid to make my life a little bit easier when lining or drawing the rest of the background. I'll use this much more later in the video. I'll also add a cup, maybe coffee, but maybe it's too late for coffee, so let's just say it's hot chocolate. I'm a bit lazy, so let's use this symmetrical ruler. Now when I line it, whatever appears on one side will also appear on the other side. This saves me some time and also makes sure that the cup is symmetrical. Now let's line and draw all the other props on the dining table. While lining, I decide that outside of the table and booth, I want the rest of the background to have a more painted look, so I decide not to line it and go straight to coloring the character and other props for now. Here I'll quickly add some flat colors to the character, the dining booth, the table, and the props. I don't render everything fully at this stage, since I haven't decided exactly what direction I want the light to come from and where it should come from right now. After coloring the character, the dining booth, and all the props, I decide that something's missing from the drawing, which is overhead lamps. Many diners have these overhead lamps hanging above each table, so I decide that the drawing looks a little bit empty without it. After playing around with the perspective of the lamps a little bit, I leave the sketch as is and go straight to drawing the background. Using the perspective grids I made earlier, I start drawing in the window frames. After finishing drawing the window frames, I go back to my reference photos and start drawing the city background. Cities often have all sorts of lights, and depending on the drawing or what kind of mood you want to go for, you can simplify the colors or use a lot of them. In this drawing, I want a little bit more depth of interest, so I'm using a lot of colors for the city background. When drawing city light backgrounds, a brush that I really like to use to quickly add city light windows is the Raiku City Lights Beta Brush on Clip Studio Asset Store by raikukitty. I draw some horizontal strokes with it to quickly fill in some windows, and then I set the color to transparent to erase some of the windows from it. Next, I'll use a regular eraser brush to erase some of the windows so that it's a little bit more irregular. It looks a little bit rough at this stage, but I'll adjust it to properly fit the perspective of the building using the transform tool. I'll set the layer to add glow, and lock the layer transparent pixels to start coloring in some different colors for the light. This is totally optional, but just something that I feel like doing in this drawing, just to add a little bit more color. Now that I've finished with the city background mostly, I'll go ahead and start lining and coloring these headlamps. Now that we finished that, I'm pretty much done with the base colors for this drawing. But there's no lighting yet, so using my references and also thinking about color temperature, I want to go for really cozy and warm lighting for the drawing. I'll use a multiply layer to quickly block in some colors that I think might look good, and also use an overlay layer to plan out some highlights. I put all of the layers that belong on the inside of the diner into a folder, and then clip the multiply layer over that. Next, I feel like since the city background is drawn a little bit rough and I want the focus to be on the character and interior anyways, I decided to blur it. Now, you don't necessarily have to go for a warm tone. For example, in this photo reference, even though many cafes and restaurants use warm lighting, this one uses cool toned lighting. Lighting of a drawing can be completely up to you and what mood you want to go for. For example, if I use a cooler tone, it would look something like this. But for this drawing, I want to go for a warmer tone, so let's go back to the earlier layers and start planning out actual lighting. Now, since the lamps are the main source of the light, I'll use it to determine where shadows are being cast and in what direction. Shiny surfaces such as glass or metal tend to reflect highlights better, so I try to reflect that by using brighter colors on smoother materials. Speaking of reflection, since I'm imagining this diner table to be smooth, I'll color pick some of the colors of the objects on the table and roughly draw it as a reflection below it. Next, I'll go ahead and render the character. I'm imagining this knit sweater to have a really soft texture, so I'm using a soft painterly brush for this. I'm imagining the sweater to be a little bit oversized and maybe slightly thick, so I try to draw and shade reflecting on that. Meanwhile, hair is more shiny, so I generally use slightly sharper brushes. Finally, we're done with most of the shading, but not quite finished just yet. While I finished rendering the darker shades, I haven't finished rendering the lighter colors. I use the overlay layer to brighten up the drawing a little bit, and imagine the headlamps shining down onto the table and the different objects on the table as well. Next, since I want the light to be a little bit brighter on the lamp, I make a new layer, use an airbrush to quickly draw a bright orange hue, reflective of the more warm toned lamp, and set it to add a glow. Now let's draw the window reflection. Because the glass surface of the window is also reflective and flat, things inside of the diner, particularly light, will easily be reflected onto the glass. The character and part of the booth will also be reflected on the glass as well. I don't feel like redrawing this too detailedly, so I just quickly block out some colors since this will all be blurred later. Now that it's blurred and I've lowered the opacity, it's looking much better. Finally, since I think this corner of the character is not very visible, I play around with darkening it, and then decide instead of darkening it, let's draw some highlights on the character. I imagine the highlights to be coming from the street lamp outside of the diner window, so this adds a little bit of separation between the character and the background. Finally, I play with overlay layers a little bit to further warm the tone of the drawing. After playing around with adding a gradient map, some noise, some blur, and some RGB shift, I finish up the drawing. And that's it. That's how I personally draw interior lighting, thinking of color temperature and different light bulbs. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate if you could like and subscribe if you'd like to see more from my channel. If you have specific topics that you'd like me to cover next, feel free to leave a comment. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!